we're going to be doing and talking with the people who are archiving fan history. I'm Joe Siclari, um, chairman of FANAC.org, and we have Peter Balestrieri, Susan Graham, and Phoenix. Um, oh God, I
Alexander.
sorry,
Sorry, it's not on my profile.
we actually just met. So, as we're doing this, we'll ask as many questions as we can. We're going to ask you to please hold your questions, either put them in the chat or put them on, uh, discuss them at the end of the program. And what we'll do is just ask each of the participants to start with just a brief description of your current collection and what you are archiving that is related to science fiction fandom. And Pete, you're in the top spot, so can I ask you to do it first?
Sure, thank you. Well, we don't have one collection at U of I. We have many, many, many collections that are all related to science fiction. And I would say that those are divided between what I consider to be mainline a science fiction fandom from the earliest days right up into the 60s, and then media fandom, which picks up in the mid to late 60s and continues through to today. So, in terms of science fiction collections, we have Mike Horvat's collection, we have Rusty Hevlin's collection, Gertrude Carr, Dal Coger, Dan McPhail. So the collections of fanzines, convention materials, correspondence, everything relating to fandom, news zines, semi-pro zines. Then in the Hevlin collection, we have over 10,000 pulp magazines, uh, probably somewhere upwards of 40,000 books relating to science fiction, either fiction or works connected to science fiction. And then, just an enormous number of small collections of sometimes artifacts, uh, as I said before, convention materials, vids, filk, on and on and on. And all of these basically um, beginning to come in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So a lot of these have been here for 20 years or more, and most of them, I would say, within the last 15 or so years. And by the time I began in 2012, the commitment had already been made to keep acquiring science fiction fandom. So that was begun before I started, right before I started, and has continued through until today. So what are we archiving? All the kinds of things that I mentioned. And then I'm always looking I have a big Holy Grail list. So I'm always trying to archive little bits and pieces that would fill in those gaps in fandom history. And I think that's
Well, we'll
plenty
get
for
to
now.
your Holy Grail in a little while. I'm sure each of you might have a few items that, despite the size of your collections, you'd still like to get. Susan, can you
Sure.
take next?
My name is Susan. I work at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. We're part of the University System of Maryland, just outside of Baltimore City. And we have a lot of science fiction collections too. We have a large collection of books, criticism and reference works, bibliographies, journals, periodicals. And thousands of pulp magazines too, graphic novels. We have a great comic book collection as well. We have original sci-fi and fantasy artwork, cover artwork by Kelly Freeze. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And posters. We have records, like records of authors and actors speaking science fiction stories, telling science fiction stories. And we have our Coslet Sapienza fanzine collection. So that's made up of Walter Coslet's collection, which was purchased in the 70s, and Peggy Ray Sapienza's collection, which was donated to us by Peggy Ray, I think in 2001. And so I'm a little bit different than I think the others on the panel. I'm kind of a generalist and I wear a lot of hats, so I'm not an expert at all. And also, we don't have dedicated funding for our fanzines, but I'm a great champion of it. We have about 15,500 in our catalog, so you could search for those. However, we have about 45 linear feet of fanzines that are uncatalogued, waiting to be waiting for the world to know that we have them. And I mean, we can talk about that later too. But we also have convention materials, also unprocessed. Even our unprocessed stuff, though, is open to the public. We have literary manuscripts too. So we have the collections of Lawrence Watt Evans, Roger Zelazny, Brian Daly, David Bischoff, and others.
Okay. Phoenix, you have probably one of the largest collections in the country, so can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. So I'm Dr. Phoenix Alexander, and I'm the JK and Doris Klein Librarian for Science Fiction and Fantasy at UC Riverside, where I look after the Eaton Collection, which is, as you mentioned, one of the country's largest collections of science fiction, fantasy, and related genres. And the collection started in 1969 with the purchase of about 7,500 books. This was the personal library of Dr. J. Lloyd Eaton. And like my colleagues in the presentation, it's since grown to constitute many thousands, hundreds of thousands of items. So we have more than 100,000 hardback and paperback books, complete runs of many pulp magazines and periodicals. If you can name a genre periodical in the 20th century, we probably have a complete run of it, if not duplicates of it. We have associated literary collections of more than 30, I think that number's grown now, science fiction, fantasy, and horror authors, including Anne McCaffrey, the recently acquired Terry and Carol Carr papers, Gardner Desoir, and our fanzine collections in particular, and fandom collections are huge, ranging across the Fred Patton collection, Stu Schiffman, Bruce Pelt, Paul and Karen Anderson, as well as many thousands of comic books, anime, and manga. And in terms of just a few recent things, I should say I've been in the role since 2022, so not very long at all, really. But before that, I was working at the University of Liverpool for their science fiction collection, which is one of Europe's largest collections of science fiction. And in my time at UCR, we've since acquired a manuscript from Margaret Cavendish, The Blazing World, which I'm very excited to say has been digitized by our team and is now available to view online. The aforementioned Terry and Carol Carr papers, some additions to Nella Hopkinson's archive, as well as the Lou Shiner papers, just to name a few. And like Susan was saying, many of our fanzines in particular are unprocessed, which means, we have, they're in boxes, there is maybe an inventory for some of them, but we do allow researchers to access them, because otherwise, if we waited until everything was catalogued, and with finding aids up, it would be decades before folks could actually see them. So that's a sort of brief snapshot of the Eaton collection and what I've been doing the last couple of years. And I'm looking forward to answering more questions in this conversation.
Okay.
Yes, it is 5.
Okay. Well, one of the things that's a priority for us at FANAC is making this material accessible and accessible from people when they're at home online. Can you tell us what of your materials would be available, or what access they would have to material online. And Phoenix, you just talked. You want to talk again?
Sure. And it's a great question, and it's something that I'm sure all of us in the conversation are sort of facing. So I'm going to drop a link to the Online Archive of California, which does contain some digitized collections, most notably the J.K. Klein photographs on science fiction fandom, of which there are many thousands, as well as the Margaret Cavendish manuscript that I mentioned. But the problem with fanzines in particular, and this is something that we're facing, is copyright issues, of course. Fanzines have many authors, many creators involved, and it can be really tricky to not breach copyright basically by digitizing and making them publicly available. So what we're doing at UCR, we're trying to think of ways of having virtual reading rooms that might require the same kinds of processes that researchers coming into the physical space might have to engage with, for instance, logins, that kind of thing. We did have a little pilot project of digitizing some fanzines, I think about 12 titles, but again, that's sort of behind the scenes. That's still not publicly available yet. And obviously, FANAC itself is such a fantastic resource for digitized fanzines. And it's unsatisfying, I know, as an answer, but for our fanzine collection specifically, it's something that we haven't quite taken the step yet. But like I mentioned, there are plenty of other digital materials that you can access online. For instance, the Klein photos, we actually do have the rights to those. It was part of the paperwork when they came to us. So we can post those and we can share those, without running into any issues. But I'll stop there, and I'll find the relevant link to put in the chat while others speak.
Okay. Well, Susan, you want to go again?
Sure. So I think mine probably is not very satisfying either. We don't have a lot, or actually any of our fanzines online on our digital collections. However, we've scanned a lot for FANAC and given them fanzines. We have, you can search for fanzines for us, you can email us or call us, and we're happy to search through and make scans for you. We do that a lot. We've done that for David Ritter, who does the First Fandom series, and other researchers, and we make really good scans, I will say. And we're just very short-staffed. We don't have a lot of resources, and so that is one thing we would like to work on, since we do have some of them already scanned for researchers, is just getting them up. And it takes, I think, a lot more work than people think, at least the standards that we have to uphold in the metadata and all of that to put up. So yeah, we're kind of behind on that. But again, like I said, I love this collection, and we just reach out to us, and hopefully researchers know that. They find us. You can search again for part of our collection online, and we're looking for ways, to get more stuff online, but unfortunately we're not there yet.
Okay. Pete, it's your turn. Uh-oh. Sounds off.
Sorry about that. So since 2014, we have had almost 800 fanzines fully digitized, online, accessible to anyone, and they are fully transcribed. And I'll put those two links into the Zoom when I'm done speaking. In 2013, I went to LoneCon, which was my first Worldcon, and first person I met was Rusty Burke, great longtime fan, and member of the Robert E. Howard Society. And I met all the people from the REH Society and got to be great friends with them. Then I met Melissa Conway, Phoenix's predecessor at the Eaton Collection, and Melissa and I began a nice relationship. Then I met Joe and Gay Haldeman, who became my open sesame over the years. because they were such great friends of Rusty Hevlin's. And at that con, I also met Rich Lynch, who was going to be with us today, and I was hoping to see him because I haven't seen him and talked to him in quite a while. But when I was talking to Rich, I asked him, because I had just begun my time in 2012 at Iowa, I asked him what fandom expected or wanted from university archivists. And his immediate response to me was digitize the fanzines. So when I returned to Iowa from that con, that was my plan. And in 2014, we managed to get a fairly large grant from the library, which was matched by the Office for Development and Research. And we were able to hire a full-time librarian to both digitize and create all of the metadata. And before this ever began, the whole project went before University Legal. And University Legal decided that it was perfectly all right for us to go ahead, digitize everything, and put all of it online. So that's what we did. And all of those fanzines are there. These are all from the Hevlin collection. Rusty was an extraordinary collector, and so the condition of almost all of them is just pristine. We also, I've known Joe and Edie now for quite a while, and we have also contributed whenever possible to FANAC. Everything that we have online has been available to FANAC since we began. And I've worked with Mark Olson, and Mark's been a great resource in this area as well. When I need to ask a question and it leans towards the historical, a lot of times I'll ask Mark. And so for us, it's just been fantastic. And it's going on 20 years now. We have never, ever received a takedown order. We have never received one complaint from anyone involved in any of these fanzines. I think that it's understood within the community that digitizing the fanzines, preserving these things, was a huge goal for the people interested in preserving the history of science fiction fandom. So we're really glad that we were able to go ahead with the project, put everything online. I've only had one complaint, and it wasn't a complaint. It was someone who heard about the project. It was a fan, a fairly prominent fan, a fan who's also a librarian, which kind of shocked me. But he asked me to never digitize his zine, never to put it online, not to photocopy it, not to present it to students, not to let anyone see it. And I was happy to comply and say that we would not put it online, but we digitized it for preservation. And I do make all of these available to students and the many classes that happen every year. So for us, it's been a great experience. And the DIY side of this, the second link, we have a DIY history website, and all of the Hevlin fanzines went to that website. And over a period of, I think, less than 2 years, every single one of the fanzines was completely transcribed by volunteers. And what we found out was that the majority of the volunteers were not science fiction fans, which is what I had thought was going to happen. It turns out that there are people who are just avid transcribers, and they heard about the project, and there were a number of people who jumped in and transcribed over 100 fanzines themselves. So for us, it's been a very easy process, and I think a very rewarding one.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm just going to jump in here a minute to give you an idea of what we do as far as looking at permissions. There are certain items that, of course, are basically public domain, and all of those we believe are available for scanning once we get copies, and we have volunteers. Well, we've got volunteers who are working with us around the world, literally. We've gotten material from South America, Australia, all over Europe, as well as all over North America. But and people have been willing to allow us. What we use is the Fanish permission of the editors, and once we get a permission from them, and if their material is available to us, of course, we go ahead and take that as permission. Basically, if someone gives you permission for copyrighted material, you're allowed to use it, as we understand it. As far as older material, it's more a matter of legibility sometimes, especially when you start getting into the 30s. Some of that material is difficult to get a clear copy of, but we try to do the best we can as far as putting things together. So we work under a Fanish permission. We have gotten a couple of questions about some material that was up. We had one photo up was up, for example, where let's just say it was a costume that was a bit risque, and the woman was then teaching college and asked that she not have that piece put online. And we've had one or two people who have asked us also not to put their fanzines up, and we keep that in our, I guess you can call it our non-permissions list, for which we have, I think, a list totaling about 3 people. So most fans are willing to still allow their material to be shared. We also do not add in professionally published fiction or things like that. Sometimes it's difficult to tell whether or not there is material you have to watch out for in a fanzine, but no one, again, has complained to us about that kind of material. But that gives you an idea of where we're coming from, and if there's any extra legal things that you can use to point out to some of your lawyers, that they should let you do it. Okay. We talked a little bit about the focus of the collections, but are there some specialties that you really would like people to know about? The University of Texas does have a focus on popular culture in the media, and they have quite a sizable collection, and have volunteers out around the country collecting material for them. Are there things that you are actually looking for? I know adding things to your collection can possibly also add a lot more complications, but I guess it's just so much a library can have. So, but are there some key items that you think you would like to see people at least get you copies of, or and again, which of you would like to go first on that? Anyone? No one wants to talk about what they need? Okay, Pete.
So, some people in the Zoom may know Chris Garcia.
Yeah.
Chris years ago told me that he had a copy of the Yellow Warning, an original copy of the Yellow Warning. I guess for people that don't know, the Yellow Warning was written by Dave Kyle when he was in his late teens. They printed it up at his print shop. He brought it to the first World Science Fiction Convention in New York in 1939. It became part of the controversy of the first grade exclusion when the Futurians, 5 of the Futurians were barred from the convention. And Dave Kyle, so that he could get into the convention, took the 100 or so of the yellow warnings, which were warning congoers that the organizers of that con, NICON, were exhibiting non-democratic behavior, and that they should look out for that. And he stashed these behind a radiator, and they were found by I think James Taurasi's sister, and she brought them to him. And the discovery of the yellow warning is what led directly to the barring of the five Futurians from the con. So Sam Moskowitz published his version of the yellow warning in his book Immortal Storm, and it was heavily censored and left out a lot of what Dave Kyle had put in there. There are versions online now of the yellow warning in its entirety, but I would have always wanted to have an original, one of those original 100. So that's a holy grail for me. Otherwise, I am concentrating and have been concentrating on not purchases, because we don't have the kind of a budget that would allow us to buy the author's papers. So we have to rely on donations of author's papers. And I'm interested in taking in authors' papers. I have to say that because we do have so much material by white male authors. I have been concentrating for years on female authors, LGBTQA plus, people of color, and we've been, fairly successful in terms of taking in Susan R. Matthews papers, Brenda Close papers. We took in the papers, an enormous collection of Louis Scarborough Jr., an African-American animator who primarily worked on science fiction animation. That's another area that I'm still collecting in. And then I'm always interested in rarities. And my main focus for the last few years has been on materials and moments when fan culture or science fiction culture makes the leap into mainstream culture. So any kinds of materials like that are things I'm also really interested in.
Okay. Susan, are there any items that your university is looking for?
Yeah, I just like to echo what Peter said. We're definitely looking for creators and participants and fans who are, women, people of color, LGBTQ plus. Something I know that I would love would be the Black Flames, an issue, or the Pacificon combo zine. We don't have that. Otherwise, I would love to have maybe, I mean, Rich Lynch is actually close geographically and one of our great donors. Maybe he could help me think. I mean, because like I said, I'm not an expert here. So I don't know exactly about fanzines, but what we would want, but I know those are a few I've been looking for. Oh, someone I just personally, I was reading a dissertation about like desegregating fandom, and someone was talking about Bev Clark. So we don't have any of her fanzines. Maybe some of hers. Yeah, I don't know. I do know though that in the rest of our sci-fi collection, we do have a small endowment, but it's we're not allowed to buy from eBay. Like purchasing is they're not allowed to use the purchasing card in our acquisitions department and eBay and stuff like that. So it's sometimes hard to find stuff that we can afford. So first editions of things like N.K. Jemisin, the 5th season would be great. Or, we always like So another focus of our collections is photography and parapsychology, so the occult, so things that overlap. Um, like I just purchased some stuff that, tarot cards and sci-fi or fantasy. And also we have a really excellent art department, so we get graphic novels and comic books and stuff. So any sort of visual stuff related to sci-fi too.
Okay. Phoenix, you're the last one on this part.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so echoing what Susan and Pete said, I'm very much interested in reaching out to current authors, building relationships with current authors, the sort of classics of the future right today. Because the Eaton collection has, I mentioned the periodicals, but we have many well represented authors and titles in our collection, but you don't know what you don't know. So I'm always I have a modest budget, but I'm always looking at the book dealers catalogs, seeing, I'm particularly looking for pre-19th century materials, because my research, I came into this through my doctoral work, and that was looking at the long history of Afrofuturism. So I was primarily focused on 20th and a little bit of 19th century text. But one thing I did when I first stepped into the role was I did a review of the collection. So it was a holistic assessment of what are the strengths of the collection, what do we have well represented, where do I want the collection to go in the future? And I sort of looked at an early collection development policy from the 70s, and then sort of updated it and added to it. And so one of the things, for instance, I purchased was Amos Tutuola's The Palm Wine Drinkard, which was part of the African Hindman Writers series in 20th century. Not immediately obvious as science fiction, but to me it was absolutely part of that speculative writing, formal aspect of the genre. So really kind of thinking outside the box a bit in terms of what we expect science fiction and fantasy and fantastica in general to look like. But if I were to pick one holy grail item, would be Action Comics issue 1, but it's very very expensive. And in general, I think looking at more Hollywood materials, we actually do have quite a lot in the Eaton collection. We have the Michael Cassett papers, the F.M. Busby papers, and they contain really interesting things, not just in terms of scripts and annotated scripts for shows like The Twilight Zone, but they have production Bibles, which are really fascinating documents for students or fans of cinema. And given the proximity of us to LA, it kind of makes sense to sort of grow more those kinds of collections from both a general interest and a pedagogy type standpoint. So those are a few of my my wishes.
Okay. Pete, just so that you know, a warning, Kyle's a warning. We do have it online complete on FANAC, and I do know that there are a number of copies of it still in the Kyle family's hand, so you should talk with them.
I spoke with his daughter years ago when I think one of the last times that Dave went to a con, and I spoke with him and I spoke with his daughter, and Dave was really clear that he knew that he had copies of it and that I should talk to his daughter. So when I spoke with his daughter, she she kind of let me know that sure, they probably had some, but she had absolutely no idea where they were,
Right.
where to look for them. Yeah.
They were
And
misplaced for a long
I'd
time.
be happy to get in touch with her again. But like I say, Chris promised Chris promised we won. So every now and then I nudge him to
You should
remind him
keep
about
doing
that.
that. I'm sure he intends to get you a copy, but
I feel like the fact that it's in FANAC, goes a long way towards kind of solving that rather than just a transcription, which is mainly what's appeared online. To see a scan of the actual yellow warning, to me, that's kind of good enough.
and it is yellow paper but it's
Yeah.
just called a warning.
Ah,
If you
right.
ask for yellow
Right. It was
warning, you might not find it.
right. Right.
And as far as
Okay.
the Pecan combo program, we do have that online as well. And I don't think we have an extra copy of it, but at some point we've got to do something with all of the many zines that we have as well.
Joe, do you have Black Flame?
No.
We have Black Flame, Susan. So if you want me to send you a scan of that, I'd be happy to. I scanned it for David Ritter, and I'll send you the same scan.
Thank you. I appreciate
Welcome.
that.
Sure.
Well, I'm going to ask you once you do, you might as well send it to us too.
Of
Might as
course.
well be greedy.
I
while we're at
actually,
it.
Joe, I actually realized that I have digitized now in the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, so much stuff for David Ritter. And it occurred to me that if David could have gotten those things from you, he wouldn't have gotten in touch with me. So I am going to, on Monday, put together all of the scans that we've done for David in the last few years for his books, and I'll send all of those to you as well. A lot of what it is are these really obscure things or rare things that nobody else had. So
We'd love to have that.
you
And
bet.
I should tell you, we put this on our website, but that all of our material on our website is being archived by the Library of Congress. Now, your materials might be as well. I have no idea how they handle that, but we gave them permission to take it, and so that somebody keeps it going after we're no longer using it.
Well, and so I arranged to have both Fancyclopedia 3 and FANAC fanzines crawled twice a year. So twice a year, we're making a copy of both websites.
Well, great. It's our material is open, and we want it to be used as much as possible out there. Okay. I guess since we're primarily interested in fanzines, this one may be an easy question and it may be an impossible question. How many fanzines do you actually have in your archives? In some kind of general number. Are you talking 10,000, 100,000, half a million?
100,000 at least.
How many?
100,000.
Okay. Susan, any idea?
No, I mean, only in terms of boxes, because like I said, we have like almost 16,000 that you can search, but then we have 48 linear feet. So a banker's box, which we call a record carton box, we have about 48 of those. So however many fit in there, which can be a lot. So
Oh, yeah. I have a lot of those myself. I know how many can fit. Pete?
We have upwards of 100,000, and I have about 500 boxes unprocessed in storage. So I don't know how many are in those 500 boxes. I'm talking bankers boxes now.
Yep.
And so, yeah. And then if I include all of the Horvat dupes and all of the Hevlin dupes, it's got to be another at least 5,000. So I know that it's way upwards of 100,000. And that's science fiction. Those are science fiction zines. And then I'd have to actually raise that number even higher because of our devotion to media fanzines, many of which focus on science fiction,
Yep.
but not the literary.
Well, I know what you mean. Edie just posted a note that said makes feel better about the our garage, which is well, does have hundreds of boxes in there, but most of our collection is in our basement. I like to think it's mostly in file cabinets, but a lot of it isn't. But it's the kind of thing that I'm sure you guys run into every single day. Um, there's just a lot of material out there, and we all need to work at it. Um, you've already covered what a number of the collections that you've accumulated over the years. The I have a personal collection. Pete has mentioned that he would be willing to supply some material. Um, Phoenix, do you exchange zines out with other collections or other material places? And got to ask my bias question is, would you allow some of the material to come FANAC's way for us to look at? We did work with your predecessor quite closely on and receive some materials from her.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mentioned this in one of the in the questions I was typing an answer to. Yeah, my answer to a question, but the digitization issue is actually not down to me. It's actually determined by my university administration and legal team, which as I mentioned are a bit skittish. However, if you're talking about offering fanzines to be scanned for FANAC, me personally, I am very, very happy for that. I mean, and there's a precedent, it's a fan resource. It's, you have the history, you have the sort of legacy, I guess, that I don't anticipate any issues with that at all from my superiors. So again, for me personally, I'd love to help. So tentative, yes, just write to me, and I can get the official permission from my higher up.
Well,
But
that would be wonderful.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. Because we want to, this, as we were, we're talking, there's so much material in our institutions, and even if we can't catalog them all in our lifetimes, if we can at least make a big chunk of those available online, and folks can do the have the pleasure of browsing through the titles, finding things that we might not even have time to find. I think that's the goal, that's the dream.
Okay. And Susan, we've already gotten material from you, so thank you as well. I'd like to get into a little bit of the history on how the university got involved with this. Obviously, libraries often like to have historical collections from writers, but how did you get involved in the Fanish aspects of it? Whichever, Susan, want to go first this time?
Sure. So our university is a really young university. It started in 1966, and the special collection started in 1973. And apparently, they surveyed the faculty to see, what they should collect. They didn't have lots of money to collect illuminated manuscripts, so photography and science fiction were two big things that not a lot of people, I guess, were collecting in the 70s. Um, and one of the people instrumental in establishing the special collections was Jeremiah Stephanie. He was a really great photographer, and actually, I'm an alum of UMBC in the 90s. He was one of my photo teachers, but he was also a big sci-fi fan. So not only did he help us get the Lewis Hine photographs of child labor, which is one of our major collections, but he also helped with the sci-fi side. So I think because he was a fan, it wasn't just first editions of or writers' papers. And also, like I said, we don't have a long history or hundreds of years of alumni to have these huge endowments. So I think just creating the relationships, and then so I think in the 70s they did have money to buy the Walter Coslett collection, which was I think about 10,000 items. And then Peggy Ray Sapienza lived in Maryland, and I think knew that UMBC collected sci-fi. So our former chief curator, I think, grew a relationship with her. And we had an endowment established in 2001 by Rita Seplowitz-Saltz. And that's just in general for science fiction. And so we can use some of that for buying. So, but again, it's hard. At least it's been hard for me finding a lot of fanzines to purchase that aren't on eBay. But again, it's a small endowment, but we are very grateful for it.
Okay. Anyone next? Pete?
Hi. Can you repeat the question, Joe?
Sure. I was wondering how your university got
Yes, how did we
involved in
get
it.
started? I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I think that it was a combination here at Iowa of heads of special collection, a number over a period of decades, who were interested in the history of self-publishing. So in a very sort of general way, UI's heavy involvement in things like fanzines and fandoms of all kinds were focused on those communities producing enormous amounts of self-published material. And so I've always thought of science fiction fanzines as being underneath this much larger umbrella of the history of self-publishing, which would include, things like the tiny books that were created by the Bronte sisters and their brother, and the little universe that was created there. It would be things like, Mark Twain, Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass, and things like church bulletins and community cookbooks and the small, fanzines, the small literary magazines at the turn of the 20th century. And then we have a fabulous collection of French Revolutionary pamphlets. And these were the pamphlets created by the Committee for Public Safety. They're signed by Robespierre. They were printed in print shops all over Paris and then immediately taken to the streets and distributed. We have a big collection of those. So I think that Mike Horvat was trying to find a home for his collection of fanzines, convention materials, apozines, et cetera, et cetera. And and N3F, National Fantasy Fan Federation.
You got it.
N3F material. So I think that, like so many fans have, and this is a really common experience, that they try to find a place to take their collections. And I think that Mike Horvat tried, and he reached out to a number of institutions, and the collection was too big. And it was offered to Iowa, and Iowa said yes. And that over a period of decades, that became kind of a really common response here. If something was offered to us, we took it. We didn't ask for a box list. We didn't ask for how many things were there. If it was offered, we took it, regardless of size. So, after I started, Hevlin was, I think, over 600 boxes. Horvat was way, way, way beyond that. And came in over a period of years because of its size. And by the time I started, 100 boxes was a small collection. If somebody offered me 100 boxes, I said, oh, sure, yeah, we'll take that. So it grew and grew, and Horvat was the first big one. But then in 2000, and that was 2004. And then in 2009, we were really lucky and fortunate to form a relationship with the Organization for Transformative Works, which is the premier organization, volunteer organization that archives media fandom. And we became part of their fan history preservation project. And through them, in 2000 and I want to say 9, we received the Ming Watney collection, which includes the duplicates of the Lucas archive. And it was brought to us, this archive was rescued from Lucas by Maggie Nowakowska. We have her papers. And then it was delivered to Ming Watney, who set up a distro for media fanzines. And then that was the first big collection that we took in. And that's in about over 400 doc boxes. And again, it's one of the biggest media fan collections, but we have a number of collections like that. I see that Morgan Dawn is in the Zoom. Morgan Dawn's collection is enormous and runs into almost as many boxes. And then so many others. So I think that really since about 2009, we have been all in, focused on as many different kinds of fandom as possible. It was primarily, my job was created to deal with all the science fiction fandom that we were accumulating, and I've been all in with that ever since. So that's, I think, about as close as I can get to how it all started.
Okay. And Phoenix, can you give us an idea? Your university was one of the first 2 or 3, I believe, that actually started with some of these collections. I believe Bowling Green might have been before you, but I don't know others.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things come down to just sheer serendipity. You know, in the beginning, it just takes somebody to see the research value or the scholarly value in collecting science fiction materials when it wasn't particularly respected as a field. So, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the initial donation of the 7,500 titles was done by the then university librarian in 1969. And then really George Slusser was sort of instrumental in building the Eaton collection into what it is today in his 25 years. He was a faculty member, but also duly posted in the library, sort of working as the curator of the Eaton collection. And he grew the collection. And of course, the Eaton Conference had its inaugural meeting in 1979, which was really, again, to bring in scholars, authors, and program academic events around the Eaton collection, right? And that further helped build the community, build collections as donations came in and so on and so forth. And then in 2012, we were very lucky to have J.K. Klein leave his endowment to UCR. My position is a named position. It's the Klein Librarian for Science Fiction and Fantasy. And it's really something I'm thinking of nowadays as a kind of a dying breed in libraries, which is the subject specialist librarian, right? Which is essentially what my position is. And you don't, as I was finishing up grad school in 2019, they were kind of on the way out. It seems like a lot of positions get sort of collapsed into one. And this is across the board, universities are underfunded and libraries are underfunded and under-resourced. So again, serendipity, but not serendipity too, because in those 25 years, Schlasser and others, like you mentioned, Melissa Conway, really, you have to go out and you have to build the relationships in an organic way. And I'm fortunate in that, as we all are, I love science fiction. I'm a writer, I'm a fan, as well as a librarian of things. So for me, it's just sort of all part of the same job responsibilities, as it were. But you have to build these relationships. Octavia Butler in the Huntington is another example. They invited her to come and give talks, and she was a local author in Pasadena. And And that's part of the joy of it. You know, we have these collections in our stacks, but then, you know, doing events like this, or doing events, you know, online, or programming, or teaching, presenting at conferences, it all sort of gives life to the collections. That sounds a bit grandiose, but it's what we want to do, you know, as librarians. And so obviously, yeah, as I mentioned, I'm very fortunate to have the endowment that supports a position like mine. And going forward, you know, it's only going to be, hopefully he'll be here a very long time, and we'll be able to sort of grow the collection even more. And just the other day, actually, on the 8th, we had a virtual Eaton symposium, which I organized, which sort of brought together fans, authors, editors, to kind of give a state of the field of science fiction. And then we also have an in-person student-run conference in April too. So again, we're trying to pick up the programming again, and trying to honor the legacy of the Eaton Conference and Schlosser and all of those who came before us.
Okay, good. It's good for the rest of us to know some of this, so we know how we might approach you, or at least what might be going on.